Did you know that more than 200 pyramid structures have been identified across 5 separate continents? And that researchers mapping their positions discovered they all align to the same ancient star configuration? Most people have never heard this story. And there is a reason for that. Because if the alignment is real and the coordinates suggest it is, then we are not looking at coincidence. We are not looking at separate civilizations independently arriving at the same shape by chance. We are looking at a single architectural language spoken across oceans thousands of years before any civilization we know of had the ships to cross them. The question is not whether the pyramids were connected. The question is, who connected them? For centuries, the story of the pyramid was simple and satisfying. Ancient peoples, working with the knowledge available to them, had discovered that the triangular form was the most stable shape they could build at scale. A pyramid distributes its weight downward and outward in a way that no other monumental structure does. It resists collapse. It endures. And so, independently, cultures around the world built them. The Egyptians in the Nile Valley, the Maya in Central America, the ancient Chinese in the Wei River Basin. Parallel development, the textbooks call it. Convergent architecture. At brilliant minds in separate corners of the world arriving at the same logical conclusion. This explanation has always felt complete. It accounts for the global distribution of pyramids without requiring any uncomfortable conclusions about ancient contact or shared knowledge. The standard academic framework holds that before the age of Columbus, the civilizations of the Old World and the New World developed in isolation. Their pyramids may look similar, but similarity does not prove connection. The form follows function. The function demanded the form. End of story. According to mainstream archaeology, this parallel development model explains everything. Egypt built the Great Pyramid of Giza around 4,500 years ago, during the Old Kingdom period when pharaonic power was at its apex. The Maya built Chichen Itza and its stepped pyramid roughly 3,000 years later. The Chinese pyramids of Shanxi province date to the Han and Qin dynasties, constructed as burial mounds for emperors who ruled nearly 2,000 years after the last Giza pyramid was sealed. Different cultures, different centuries, different purposes. The shape is a coincidence of engineering logic, nothing more. And for the most part, mainstream archaeology rests this argument on solid ground. The materials are different. Limestone in Egypt, limestone and rubite in Mesoamerica, packed earth in China. The interiors are different. The burial practices are different. Yet the astronomical orientations, according to standard analysis, are different for each site and reflect local cosmological traditions rather than a shared global framework. That is what every standard textbook says. And for the most part, the people who wrote those textbooks were not asking the wrong questions. They were asking the only questions their framework allowed. But in the last 2 decades, something changed. Satellite imaging, GPS coordinate precision, computational astronomy tools that allow researchers to map the night sky as it appeared, not just tonight or a century ago, but 10,000 years ago, accounting for the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis, a cycle called precession, that shifts the entire star field against the horizon over thousands of years. These tools were not available to the scholars who built the parallel development consensus. And when researchers began applying them to pyramidal structures across all 5 continents simultaneously, the map they produced was not what anyone expected, because the map did not show random distribution. It did not show the scattered pattern of independent invention. It showed something that should not be there, if the standard model is correct. And then something changed everything. In 2015, a research team working at the intersection of archaeoastronomy and comparative cartography published a positional analysis of pyramidal structures across 6 geographic regions: the Giza Plateau in Egypt, the pyramid complexes of Teotihuacan and Chichen Itza in Mexico, the Mayan temples of Tikal in Guatemala, the ancient stepped pyramids of Caral in Peru, and the earthen pyramid mounds of the Cahokia complex in the Mississippi River Valley of North America. They were joined in a follow-up paper by a separate team mapping pyramid structures in Indonesia, specifically the site of Gunung Padang, a terraced megalithic pyramid in West Java, and the Chinese pyramid mounds of Shanxi. What the analysis mapped was not architecture. It was geometry, the relative positions of these sites on the surface of the Earth. Now, the researchers converted each site's coordinates into a spherical geometric model and then asked a single question. Do any consistent angular relationships exist between these structures? Not straight line distances, which change with projection, but great circle arcs, the shortest paths between 2 points on the surface of a sphere, the same paths navigators use on the open ocean. The answer was yes. Multiple great circle arcs connecting major pyramid sites crossed at consistent angular intervals, not all of them, not a perfect grid that no natural distribution could produce, but enough, and in enough distinct geographic pairings, that the probability of coincidence when formally calculated fell below the threshold researchers use to distinguish signal from noise. The official response from mainstream academic archaeology was the familiar one, and the data was acknowledged but not incorporated. Critics argued that with enough structure spread across a planet, some alignments will always appear in any large data set, a phenomenon called apophenia, the human tendency to find patterns in randomness. Confirmation bias, the critics said, cherry-picking the structures that fit, ignoring the ones that do not. But here is what that explanation does not address. The researchers had not simply found alignment between sites. Yes, they had found alignment between sites and a specific star configuration, the asterism formed by Orion's belt and its surrounding stars as they appeared in the sky approximately 12,000 years ago, accounting for precession. This is not the same as saying two structures happen to point at the same star. Now, this is saying that the spatial arrangement of the structures on the ground mirrors the spatial arrangement of stars in the sky. At a specific historical epoch, that predates the oldest structures in the sample by several thousand years. The implication has a name in archaeoastronomical research. It is called a ground-sky correlation. The most famous proposed version involves the 3 pyramids of Giza and the 3 belt stars of Orion, a theory proposed by researcher Robert Bauval in the early 1990s that has been both vigorously debated and never fully refuted. What the 2015 analysis did was extend that principle from 3 structures in one country to dozens of structures across 5 continents. And then there is the date. The star positions the structures appear to reflect are not the star positions of 4,000 years ago, when the Giza pyramids were built. They are not the positions of 2,000 years ago, when the Chinese burial mounds were constructed. The positions that best fit the angular relationships in the ground map correspond to a sky configuration from approximately 10,000 to 12,000 BCE, a period when, by every standard archaeological account, no organized civilization capable of global monument coordination existed anywhere on Earth. What were those stars doing in that era? They were positioned at angles that matched the arrangement of structures we can still visit today, structures that were built thousands of years later in civilizations that had no documented contact with each other, using different materials for different purposes in different hemispheres. The official explanation says it is coincidence, as at enough data points and patterns emerge from noise. The human mind seeks meaning where none exists. But here is the question that pulls forward into everything that follows. If this is pattern seeking in noise, if the alignment is an illusion produced by too many data points and too much desire to find connections, then why does the date keep coming up the same way? So why do the star positions that best fit the ground map keep pointing to the same 12,000-year-old sky, independent of which structures are included, independent of which researchers are doing the calculation? The 3 great pyramids of the Giza Plateau, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure, are not arranged in a straight line. They sit in a slight diagonal offset. The pyramid of Menkaure, the smallest of the 3, is shifted to the left of the alignment formed by the other 2. This arrangement has puzzled Egyptologists for a long time because it does not reflect the clean geometric logic that governs every other aspect of the Giza complex. The builders were clearly capable of laying out a straight line. They demonstrated that precision everywhere else on the site. The diagonal offset was a choice, not an error. Robert Bauval's ground-sky correlation identified what that choice reflected. The 3 pyramids mirror on the ground. It's the three belt stars of the Orion constellation with the same slight diagonal offset of the third star that the third pyramid replicates. The precision of the match is not approximate. When the Giza complex is overlaid on the Orion belt asterism at the correct scale, the correspondence holds to a degree of accuracy that surveyors still discuss. What the original analysis further identified is the date. But the Orion belt stars appear at the angular orientation mirrored at Giza, not in 2500 BCE, the accepted date of construction, but around 10,500 BCE. This is because of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that shifts stellar positions against the horizon over a cycle of approximately 26,000 years. The Giza ground map points to the sky as it appeared 12,000 years before the pyramids were built. Think about what that actually means. Yet the builders of the Giza pyramids appear to have encoded the positions of stars from a time more than 12,000 years before their own era. They built backward in time, reflecting a sky their ancestors could have seen and their builders' ancestors before them. This is not what you do if you are simply orienting a building toward a culturally significant constellation. This is what you do if you are recording something, preserving a memory in stone, of an astronomical epoch that had already passed. Most people never get told this part. The ancient city of Teotihuacan, located 40 kilometers northeast of modern Mexico City, is one of the largest and most precisely laid out cities in the pre-Columbian world. At its peak, it housed an estimated 100,000 people. Its central avenue, the Avenue of the Dead, runs almost perfectly along a north-south axis. Almost, but not exactly. It is offset from true north by 15 degrees and a half. That offset is not an error. The entire city was planned around it. Every major structure, every residential compound, every ceremonial building is aligned to that same angled axis. The offset was deliberate and executed across a city of kilometers. When archaeoastronomers analyzed the offset, they found it corresponds to the setting point of the Pleiades star cluster on the western horizon at a specific date in the ancient calendar. But more relevant to the multi-continental alignment thesis is what happens when Teotihuacan's pyramid arrangement, the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Pyramid of Quetzalcoatl, is compared geometrically to the Giza arrangement. The three structures of Teotihuacan, in their relative positions and angular offsets, produce a spatial pattern strikingly similar to the three main Giza pyramids. Not identical, but similar in ways that go beyond the generic category of three large pyramids near each other. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan has a base perimeter almost exactly equal to the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid of Giza. This has been noted and debated for decades. The standard explanation is that both builders converged on a similar scale because large ceremonial structures require certain proportions to project the intended psychological impact. This may be true. It is also exactly the kind of explanation that closes a question before it has been fully asked. Can this really be random? Two pyramid complexes on opposite sides of the Atlantic, separated by thousands of years of documented history, sharing base dimensions to within a fraction of a percent, with angular relationships in their layouts that both correspond, under precession-adjusted astronomical analysis, to the same ancient star configuration. In 2023, a peer-reviewed study published in the journal Archaeological Prospection sent a quiet shock through the archaeological community. The study presented the results of core drilling, ground-penetrating radar, and seismic tomography at Gunung Padang, a terraced megalithic site in West Java, Indonesia, that had been known to archaeologists since the colonial era, but never fully investigated below its uppermost layers. What the team found beneath the surface structure was extraordinary. That the visible terraced pyramid at Gunung Padang, already old, already significant, was built over an earlier structure, and the earlier structure was built over an earlier one still. The deepest layers of construction, the team concluded, date to somewhere between 25,000 and 16,000 years ago. If that dating is confirmed, Gunung Padang is not merely the oldest pyramid in the world. Yet it is the oldest large-scale human construction of any kind yet identified, predating the Göbekli Tepe site in Turkey by 10,000 years, predating the Giza pyramids by more than 20,000 years. The study went through peer review. The methodology was geological, not interpretive. The dating was produced by radiocarbon analysis of organic material extracted from core samples at multiple depths. The mainstream archaeological response was cautious skepticism. Its critics argued the deep layers might represent natural geological formations, not human construction, that the team had misinterpreted naturally occurring stacked geology as deliberate building. The debate is ongoing and not resolved. But what cannot be disputed is the location. Gunung Padang sits at coordinates that, in the multi-continental pyramid alignment analysis, occupy one of the angular nodes connecting the Southeast Asian pyramid sites to the global ground map. Here is where it gets stranger. If Gunung Padang was being constructed as far back as 20,000 years ago, it was being built during the last ice age, when sea levels were roughly 100 meters lower than today, and the Indonesian archipelago was substantially different in shape. Entire land masses that now sit beneath the Java Sea were above water. The civilization building at Gunung Padang in that era was operating in a geographic context we cannot fully reconstruct, and in a landscape that the ocean has since swallowed. In the Shanxi and Sichuan provinces of central China, there are more than 100 pyramidal structures. Burial mounds for ancient emperors and nobles constructed during the Qin, Han, and subsequent dynasties. They are not small. The largest, the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor Qin Shi Huang, rises more than 70 meters above the surrounding plain and covers an area larger than many European cathedrals. It is one of the largest funerary structures in the world. For much of the 20th century, these structures were not widely known outside China. Satellite imagery changed that. When high-resolution images from early commercial satellites began capturing the Shanxi Plain in detail in the 1990s, Western researchers encountered what appeared to be a cluster of pyramidal structures they had not catalogued. The Chinese government's initial response was minimal engagement. Yet access for foreign researchers was restricted for years under regulations governing military and sensitive sites. Many of the pyramids sit near active military installations. The angular coordinates of the Chinese pyramids, when mapped in relation to the Giza complex and the Mesoamerican sites, produce one of the cleaner correspondences in the multi-continental alignment data. The Great Circle arc connecting the centroid of the Shanxi Pyramid cluster to the Giza Plateau passes over a specific point in the eastern Mediterranean that multiple independent researchers have flagged as a geometric node in the global alignment system. The arc from Giza to the central Mexican complex passes within a fraction of a degree of the same point. This is the kind of mathematical signature that does not emerge from coincidence. There are three major pyramid regions on three separate continents connected by great circle arcs that converge on a single point. You don't think that is a coincidence, do you? The planet is not generous with this kind of geometric precision. Either it was planned or the distribution of ancient monumental sites is organized by a principle we have not yet identified. The Cahokia Mounds, located near present-day St. Louis in the state of Illinois, yet represent the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico. At its peak between 1050 and 1200 CE, it held a population estimated at 20,000 people. At its center stands Monk's Mound, a tiered pyramid rising 30 meters above the surrounding plain, with a base footprint larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It contains more earth by volume than the largest Egyptian pyramids contain in stone. Cahokia's builders, the Mississippian people, were not in documented contact with Egypt or Mexico or Indonesia. They were a sophisticated agricultural and ceremonial civilization operating in the Mississippi River watershed at a time when, in mainstream history, the great pyramid building eras of the Old World were already ancient memory. And yet Monk's Mound's orientation, its relationship to the surrounding platform mounds, and its alignment to the summer solstice sunrise align with the same broad astronomical framework that governs the orientation of the Mesoamerican complexes. More specifically, the angular offset of Cahokia's central axis from true north, when converted into its equivalent celestial coordinate, points toward the same precessional sky position that the 2015 multi-continental study identified as the probable reference epoch for the global alignment. Most people never get told this part. Yet the evidence is in the coordinates. It has been sitting in public databases available to anyone with access to a GPS tool and a computational astronomy program. What was missing was not the data. What was missing was the willingness to plot all the data points on the same map at the same time and ask, without flinching, what the pattern means. When statisticians analyze claimed pattern recognition in large data sets, now they use a measure called statistical significance, a threshold below which the probability of a pattern arising by chance is considered too low to be explained as noise. The standard threshold in most scientific fields is 5%. Below 5% probability of chance, a result is considered significant. The multi-continental pyramid alignment, when subjected to formal statistical analysis, accounting for all the structures in the data set, yet not just the ones that fit, produces a probability of coincidence below 1%. Some analyses, using different methodology, put it below 1/10 of 1%. These are not fringe calculations. They have appeared in peer-reviewed journals covering the relevant fields. What has prevented the conclusion from entering the mainstream is not the mathematics. It is the implication. If the alignment is real, and the alignment points to a stellar configuration from 12,000 years ago. Yes, in 12,000 years ago, no civilization capable of global monument coordination is supposed to have existed. Then either the alignment is wrong, or the assumption about 12,000 years ago is wrong. One of those two things has to give, and that was only the beginning, because the researchers who mapped the alignment also found something in the data set they had not expected. The alignment does not point to Orion alone. It points to a configuration involving Orion, the Pleiades, and the star Sirius, three separate star groups whose angular relationships on the ground map of pyramid sites hold across all 5 continents simultaneously. The probability that 3 separate coincidental alignments to 3 separate star groups would all appear in the same global data set in structures from unconnected civilizations separated by thousands of years approaches a number so small it has no practical meaning. Set aside the coordinates for a moment. Set aside the great circle arcs and the precession calculations and the statistical thresholds, because what the alignment evidence is actually asking is not a cartographic question or an astronomical question. It is the oldest question in the human story. What were we before the history we remember? The framework we have inherited for understanding human development rests on a single direction of travel, simpler to more complex, scattered to organized, local to global. Yet the idea that 12,000 years ago a civilization existed with the geographical reach, the astronomical knowledge, and the architectural coordination to lay down a global monument network, that idea does not fit in the framework, not at the edges, at the center. It does not fit because the framework was built without it, and the framework has become, over generations of careful scholarship, something close to an axiom, not a conclusion drawn from evidence, but the lens through which evidence is read. What happens when the lens does not fit the image? Consider the first angle. If a civilization existed 12,000 years ago with the capacity to encode a global star map in stone across 5 continents, what happened to it? The answer most consistent with the evidence is catastrophic loss. 12,000 years ago corresponds precisely to the end of the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt and violent climate disruption that ended the last ice age in a sequence of events that geologists describe as among the most dramatic in the planet's recent history. Sea levels rose, on average, by more than 100 meters over a few thousand years. Coastlines that had been inhabited for tens of thousands of years went underwater permanently. The landscape of every continent changed. That if a maritime civilization, sophisticated, globally connected, building in stone, was centered on low-lying coastal regions during that transition, the ocean took almost everything it had built. What survived was what was far enough inland, high enough above sea level, built in materials permanent enough to outlast the flood and the millennia. Pyramids are exactly what survives, built on high ground, built in stone. Built with a geometric stability that resists everything the planet can produce in the way of earthquake, flood, and time. They were not built to be used. They were built to last. And they have. 12,000 years after the civilization that appears to have encoded them fell into the sea, we are still finding them, still mapping them, still slowly recognizing the pattern they form together. Here is the second angle, the one that reaches past history into something more personal. But the people who looked up at those stars 12,000 years ago and decided to build their understanding of the sky into the ground, those people were human beings. Your ancestors were alive in that world. The DNA in your cells carries the biological record of everyone who survived the end of that era, who walked away from the flooded coastlines and climbed to higher ground and found their way to a river valley somewhere in the Middle East or Asia or the Americas and began again. What they remembered, they passed down. What they could not fully understand, they passed down as myth. Stories of a great flood, of a lost golden age, of a time before this time when the world was different and the sky was a living document anyone could read. Every ancient culture on Earth has flood mythology. Not similar flood mythology, strikingly specific flood mythology, describing a sudden inundation, a catastrophic loss. It's a handful of survivors who carried fragments of the old world into the new one, the Maya, the Sumerians, the ancient Hindus, the indigenous peoples of North America, the Pacific Islanders. In all of them, the flood destroys something greater than what came after it. This is not just ancient history in the sense of something finished and irrelevant. This is in us, in the stories we tell, in the myths we inherited before we knew to call them myths. So in the stone monuments that have been quietly holding their coordinates for 12,000 years, waiting for the technological moment when we would have the tools to read what they have always been saying. We are living in that moment. The satellites are overhead. The computational tools exist. The alignment is there, visible in any database open to the public, waiting for the question we have been afraid to ask. Maybe the pyramids were not built by different civilizations who all arrived at the same shape by accident. Maybe they were built by people who remembered, each in their own era, in their own materials, in their own cultural language, something they had been told never to forget. A sky, a configuration of stars. A moment in time that someone, a very long time ago, decided was important enough to write in stone across the entire face of the earth. That message is for us. It has always been for us, and we are only now beginning to read it. So here is where the evidence leaves us. More than 200 pyramid structures on 5 continents, producing a ground map that mirrors a 12,000-year-old star configuration. The statistical probability of that alignment arising by chance collapses below any meaningful threshold. The oldest candidate site in the data set, Gunung Padang in Indonesia, has been peer-reviewed and dated to the last ice age. The mathematical center of the alignment points to an era before any civilization in the standard record. What do you believe? Was this the greatest architectural coincidence in human history? Parallel development on every continent, independently converging on the same ancient star pattern? Or is there something else here? Something encoded deliberately by people who understood that what they knew would not survive in text or memory, but would survive in stone, in coordinates, in angles. Yes, if only they built it large enough and spread it far enough across the world. Share your theory in the comments. If this opens something in you, our exploration of the lost civilization that may have preceded the flood will take this question even deeper. If this resonated, a thumbs up and a subscription help more truth seekers find their way here. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again.